Welcome back once again. So in today's video, we are going to see how to use MongoDB with Spring Batch. But before that, remember guys, please subscribe, like, leave any comment, okay? It will help me to make more videos. Now, let's go. So, in today's video, we are going to see a very simple scenario. So we are going to read from Kafka and we are going to write to MongoDB. And in the next part, we are going to read from MongoDB and we are going to write it to a file by using JSON flat file item writer. But now let's focus on this use case. So the aim of this video is to use MongoDB, right? To read and write. But before that, there is something that I would like to share with you guys that will make you to understand the real motivation of our video today. So now, let's suppose that we have here our job launcher. So if you are using Spring Batch, you understand that the job launcher is just a component, right, provided by Spring Batch that will help us to start a job. Right? And we do it by using, for example, as we can see here, we have our scheduler, and then we use the job launcher interface, and then we launch our job. So far, so good, guys. Now, let's try to understand what is the job repository. And I know that you guys already know the job repository, right? Which is just a central storage that Spring Batch use in order to store the metadata of the job. And this is the representation of the schema, okay, of this metadata. So in the first part, we have batch job instance. So the batch job instance, we understand that is a table that stores the record of a unique job instance. So for example, if we have our job that runs every single day, okay, the job instance will store for every single execution of this job. So the next is job execution. So the job execution will actually store the start and the exit status and so on of our job, as we can see here. And this is very important because it will help us to track the progress of the job, and it will also help us when we restart a job. So if you remember, in Spring Batch, we have the support to restart some jobs from failure, right? So, and we will see it later, okay? Now, let's move on. So, now we have here the job execution param. So, this is actually the table that Spring Batch will use in order to store the job parameters, okay? So, for example, as we can see here in this example, once again, so we have here the job parameter. So, the job parameter can be anything that we use as parameter to run our job. So, for example, we can have here the file name if we are reading, right, from a file, okay? We can have the file name as parameter. We can have also, for example, the date, so the moment that we start our job, and also, as we can see here, it can be the identifier of the job, okay? Next, we have the job execution context. Actually, it's just the way that we are going to serialize, okay? We are going to save it in a serialized form, okay? And it will also help us to resume or restart job from where they left off. And next, we have here the batch step execution. So, for example, if you understand, if you remember, guys, a Spring Batch contains the job launcher, contains the job, okay? And then we have here the step. So a step contains a reader, processor, and writer, right? So this is the same that we are going to do here. For example, in our example, we have the reader, the processor, and the writer, where the processor is optional. So this is where the batch step execution table comes into action. For example, here in this table, we will have the records about the step itself. So here we will have the metadata related to the step execution. So we will have, for example, the step name, we will have when it started, when it had, the status itself, how many lines, for example, how many records we read, we filter, we write, okay? And for example, the skip and so on. Even, for example, the rollback count we will have. So this is very nice to understand the concept of job repository. Okay, so these are the metadata, okay, or the schema that you need to understand always, because it's very nice when you try to debug or to see how your job is working. Now, before moving further, Okay, we understand that Spring Batch used job repository, and before Spring Batch 5, it was required to use a data source. So you need to have a database, even in memory database. But for now, the data source is optional. So from Spring Batch 5, there is a new concept called by resourceless job repository, okay, which does not require a data source. So this is nice, but I think this only work for example, the use case that you don't need, for example, the restart support, okay? The use case that you don't need, for example, to share data between steps and so on. So I'm just telling you guys that for now, sometime, okay, if you have a very small application, you don't need the data source in order to configure job repository. So you just need to use the resourceless job repository. But for our Spring Batch application and for our video today, we are going to use MongoDB as our job repository. So we are going to have our reader, processor, and writer, and MongoDB will act as our job repository. This is very nice because sometime in your company, or even if you just want to use MongoDB as your, let's say, stack, okay, you can use Spring Batch with MongoDB. Starting from Spring Batch 5, okay, we have already the support. Now, this is the motivation. This is what we are going to do in these two videos that we are going to see here. So, the first use case is this one here. We are going to read from Kafka, write to MongoDB, and the next part will be reading from MongoDB and write to a flat file. So now, let's put our hands in the code and we will be back soon. Let's go. So now we are here on start.spring.io, the place that we are going to generate our project. This is the Spring initializer. So we are going to choose a Maven project using Java, okay? And we are going to use the latest stable version. And now let's create our group ID. So now the artifact ID, which will be MongoDB writer. So now that we have here our group ID and artifact ID, the next thing that we need to understand is that we are using Java 21, and also we need to start adding our dependencies. So as always, the first dependency should be Spring Batch. So let's add the Spring Batch dependency. And now the next dependency will be the MongoDB. Remember, you should use the Spring Data MongoDB, not the Spring Data Reactive or vector database, okay? So use this one, Spring Data MongoDB. And next one should be the Kafka, because we are going to use Kafka as our item reader, right? And we are going to write everything to MongoDB. So that's the reason that we are going to use here Spring for Apache Kafka. And also we need to add, for example, for now, let's add Lombok dependency. Yeah, I think that's all that we need. Okay, so we have here Spring Batch dependency, the MongoDB, Spring for Apache Kafka, and Lombok. Now let me generate the project. Now let's go. So now that we are here on our IntelliJ, let's open our POM XML. So the next thing that I'm going to do here is, let me just replace this one here. So the build part, okay, because we need some plugins, and I'm going to use the one that we have on our previous video. So let me just paste it here, the configuration. So what we have here is just the plugins. So we are going to have the Lombok plugin and also the Lombok support for Mapstract. So I think in terms of our project, okay, we have everything. I think for now we can leave it like that. And now let's start creating our Spring Batch application. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to configure the Spring Batch job repository, okay, in order to use MongoDB. So now let's start by creating here a new package. Let's call it by configuration. So now let's create here our MongoDB configuration class. As always, we need to annotate it as a configuration. So now the first thing that we need to do is let's create the Mongo client. do it like Mongo client, just like that. So Mongo client, let's call it by Mongo client, just like this. And here we're just going to return, okay, the Mongo clients like that, okay, that create, for example, like this. And I think for now, we don't need to specify here the instance that is running MongoDB, just like that. So I will add it later. So here, this is our first bean that we need to create, let's say, the MongoDB. And now we need also to create the MongoTemplate. So let's just use it like that, MongoTemplate, just like that. And here, the MongoTemplate will actually receive a Mongo client, as argument. So just like that, Mongo client. So here we can start instantiating the Mongo itself. So just like this, the Mongo client, we are going to process countries, okay? So let's just use here, for example, the country will be the name, okay, of our database name, just like that. And now the next thing that we need to do, if we just go, for example, to the documentation of Spring Batch, we will see that for MongoDB, we actually need, we need a mapping Mongo converter, and I will explain you later. So now let's create here, for example, a converter. Let's call it by Mongo, or like this, mapping Mongo converter, just like that. So the mapping Mongo converter actually will get, okay, from MongoDB template, okay, and will return a mapping Mongo converter. So let's just add here mapping Mongo converter, just like that. And here in mapping Mongo converter, we need to set, for example, here the conversion that we need is map key.replacement. So for example, here this one, what we are going to place here is just a dot, okay, because when, let's say, Spring Batch is using, for example, the job parameter and all those batch configuration, okay, it will use a specific type. So Mongo needs to understand the type of converter, and I will show you guys later. I think after that we can just return, right, the Mongo template, just like that. I think we also need to add, for example, Mongo template, mapping like that. Yes. So the next thing that we need to do is start creating the job repository, which is the main motivation that we are using MongoDB as our, let's say, job repository data source, okay, or database type. So in that order, let's just start creating here. So just like this, and here we instantiate the job repository. So job repository like that, it will be also a bean. And here is the place that we need to start adding the MongoJobRepositoryFactoryBean. So if we go, for example, here on our browser, so if we just take a look here, on the official documentation, we will see that we have now MongoDB support. So this is what we are going to do here, okay? So for example, we can just go here, let's just copy this, and let's go back to our IntelliJ and let's replace it, right? So this is what we need actually. So let's just import, okay, here MongoDB, and also we need the MongoTransactionManager, just like that. So the MongoTransactionManager actually we don't have, that's why the IntelliJ is telling us that it could not auto-write. So in order to solve that, we just need to specify the MongoTransactionManager. Just like that. And here, of course, it should be a bean. So having it as a bean, I think we need here, it's not Mongo client, but instead it should be Mongo database factory. And here is the place that we can just, for example, return the Mongo transaction manager. So just like that. So now IntelliJ is not complaining anymore. And the next thing that we need also is to provide the job explorer. So I will explain what Job Explorer is, but for now let's just use here the Job Explorer for MongoDB, and here we are going to receive MongoTemplate and also MongoTransactionManager, just like that. And let's go Explorer Factory Bean, just like that. And yeah, let's add here, let's add here, so let's add here the properties. So first is MongoTemplate, and also we need to set transaction manager, so like that. Okay, so we set the transaction manager just like that. Yeah, I think that's all that we need. We just now need to return like this, and let's create it as a bean. Okay, so now what we have here, so we have the Mongo, right? The Mongo client. So actually this is the first part, that just setting up the Mongo client, right? In order to use the MongoDB as our, let's say, data source, and where the database is country. And yeah, then we need the Spring Batch, okay, configuration. So the job repository, now we are using the MongoDB as job repository. Now, this is the place that we need to start configuring our job. So let's just create here a new package called by job, but it should be here, okay, in this level. And now we need to create our, let's say, job application, our Spring Batch application. So in that order, let's just call it by, what we are going to read is country, okay? So let's just call it by country job config, just like that. And of course, we need to annotate it as configuration class, right? And yeah, so going back here on our slide, so as we can see, this is the structure, this is the job that we are going to build, right? So we need the Kafka item reader and MongoDB item writer. So now let's create first the Kafka item reader. Let's start by creating our Kafka item reader. So let's just call it by Kafka item reader. So what we are going to receive as key, if you remember guys, go back to our videos about microservice and you will understand what is the Kafka key and the value. So the key will be a string and the value will be a country. So for example, country here, I think we can just call it by country DTO, okay, just like that. And let's create, okay, let's create the country DTO, but it should be in the package, I think, let's just call it DTO, the package name, as we can see here. It will be a record, but you can use, for example, any Java type, for example, a class, okay? But for me, as we are using, for example, let's say the latest version of long-term support of Java, so let's use the record because it serves the purpose, okay? Now, what we're gonna have here in the country, let's use the string, for example, country code, just like that. And for example, we can also use, for example, let's put it here, for example, new string, for example, a country name, I think, yeah. Let's use the country name. And also, for example, we can use a string, for example, continent, okay? An integer, I think an integer or a date, okay? But let's just use an integer for independence year. So, and the last one, let's use an integer and let's call it by score, okay? So the score of the country can be, for example, if the country is rich, developed country, or so on. Let's just play, okay? So this is our DTO that we are going to use here on our Kafka item reader. And now let's create here our bean. Let's just call it by country item reader. Now let's call it by country Kafka item reader. And of course, just in order to make it easier, it will be also a bean. And now let's just return here, for example, new Kafka item reader builder, just like that. Okay, it will be a string as a key and a country DTO as value. And now here is the place that we need to start, for example, adding some configuration. For example, the name of our reader, which will be country, right, item reader. And the next thing that we need to specify is the topic that we are going to read. So the topic will be just countries, okay? Let's call it by countries, the topic that we are going to read. And then we need to specify partitions. And I think, okay, let's just use here list of, so list of, okay? And let's put here first partition. And the next thing that it will need also is, I think, yeah, partition offset. So for partition offset, let's just leave it as an empty map, okay? Because we don't want to specify which offset we are going to start reading. And the next one that we need is, as we can see here, is consumer property, because we are reading from Kafka, right? So we are the consumer, okay? And this is very nice because we are covering some good example of reading from Kafka, okay? And we have already here on our channel a video related to a Kafka writer, and now we are going to use the Kafka item reader. So in that order, let's just use here build. And now this is the place that we need to start adding the properties, the consumer properties, okay? So let's call it by consumer properties, just like that. And the consumer properties actually should be, for example, not like that, thank you IntelliJ, but it should be properties, okay? Just like this. It should be Java util properties. So let's start adding some properties. I think, yeah, the first one can be, for example, the Kafka Bootstrap server. Yeah, but for that, instead of leaving here as a string, I like to use the real configuration, okay? So let's just use here, for example, the consumer, like that, the consumer config, which is from Apache Kafka, okay? Instead of leaving some string like that. So here in the consumer config, we can start using, for example, the Bootstrap server config, just like that, which will be the local host, okay, 9092, because we are going to use Docker in order to, let's say, run our Kafka container, okay, which will run on this port. Okay, so now that we have here the first, let's say, consumer configuration, we also need to specify, for example, as we are consumer, okay, Kafka needs also the consumer group. So in that order, let's just use properties, just like that, and let's put here, for example, consumer config, that let's call it by group, okay, group ID config, okay. So the group ID config should be, yeah, let's call it by, yeah, let's just put here country, yeah, country job, just like that. So this will be our consumer group. So the key, the serializer, okay, should be also a string, okay, so just like that. So we are going to use consumer key, the serializer, because we are deserializing our key, okay, just like that. And the value, yeah, and also we need the value, the serializer. So the value, the serializer, of course it can be a JSON, but for now let's just create here our deserializer. Let's call it serd, just like that. Guys, you need to understand, when you want to create your own deserializer, okay, you need to let's say, you need to do some manual work, okay? So this is what we are going to do. So country DTO, okay, the serializer, like that. So actually, in order to have this deserializer, the first thing that we are going to use here, let's just use here the object mapper, just like that, okay? Object mapper is the Jackson dependency. So let me just add here the Jackson dependency in order to deserialize our object. So let me just add here the Jackson deserializer, just like that. I will share the repository, but actually I just add here the Jackson dependency. And let's go back here on our server. I think now let's just reload our project by using Maven, just like that. Let's just re-import, Okay, and now we can have here the object mapper. So now this is the place that we need to indicate that our country DTO deserializer is actually a deserializer. Okay, so in that order we are going to use the dependency is org Apache Kafka common serialization. Okay, so just like that. And as we can see, it's complaining, it's saying that we need to implement some methods. Okay, so the method that we are going to implement is this one here. So what this method contains here. So this is the topic and here is the data. So now we can just, for example, use the lombok. Okay, we have the lombok, so let's use the cell for J, just like that, which actually will allow us to log. So let's just use here debug and let's say, okay, they're serializing DTO and we can specify here data. Now, here is the place that we can, for example, start implementing our logic. So I will just play safe. Okay, let's just use here try, and I will return. Okay, for now, for example, if let me just put it like that, ternary operation. So if data, okay, is not null, so is data, so no, like that. So it's better to use like that. If data is null, okay, what I'm going to do is just going to return null. Else, okay, we are going to use the object mapper, okay, and then we are going to read value. Okay, so read value, like that. So the method read value will receive the data and the class that we are going to use in order to let's say transform this data, which is a byte array, okay, into an object, into a Java type. So let's use the country DTO. Okay, so our country DTO class like that. So here we are just going to catch an exception. So when we have an exception, we just going to log, and here we just going to throw, for example, new which exception is better for this case? New. So maybe we need to create a custom exception for that, but for now, yeah. Okay, guys, remember, you need to create you need to use a let's say exception that actually defines, okay, the exception that we are getting. Okay, but for now let's just use, for example, illegal state. Okay, so illegal state, yeah, illegal state exception, just like that. Okay, we throw the illegal state just like that, and we don't need to. Now that we have, okay, now that we have here our custom deserializer, guys, remember why I do things like that. I do it like that. I think we can also put it as private final, just like that, okay, in order to make it better. So I do things like that because we need to challenge, we need to understand how, for example, here we are learning a concept called by, for example, custom or native, okay, let's say encoding and decoding by using, for example, Spring and Kafka, okay, and as we can see here. So in that order, let me just go here, let's just copy reference, and I just need I just need the reference. Okay, I will copy the reference, and now let's move back here on our country job config, and let's use it here. Okay, so just like that. I think it can be just country DTO deserializer, just like that. Okay, yeah, I think this is nice. Now we can use here our consumer properties, just like that. Okay, we can use the consumer property. Actually, I think I need to disable that stuff that is showing here. I think the next thing that we can add here, just in terms of bonus, yeah, we can add, for example, the auto let's say offset reset, okay, config, which will be earliest. Okay, we have the earliest and we have also the latest. So for example, the latest will only read the newer messages, the earliest will read from the beginning, okay, all the messages that we will have on our topic. So this is our Kafka reader. Of course, it's a big, okay? It's not that hard. We just need to specify, for example, the name, okay? We specify also the topic name, which we will do it later. We will create the topic. We need to specify the partitions, okay? For me, I'm just using one partition, and here also a partition offset. We can leave it like that, okay? And then we use the consumer configuration. So this is the way that we are going to use Spring Batch, okay? And let's say this is the way that we are going to use Spring Batch with Kafka item reader. Very easy, very simple. Now, I think let's go back to our presentation. So the reader has been created, okay? Now we need the processor. Processor actually is very simple. Let's do that. So let's just go here and let's create here our, let's say our class, no, our package. Let's call it by processor, just like that. And here, let's create here our class, and it will be, for example, country, item processor, just like that, which implements item processor. Okay, the item processor actually will receive, right, the country DTO and will return a country. Yeah, it should be a country domain entity. Okay, so in that order, let's just create, guys, it's the same, for example, here, as we don't have nothing. I can just go here, for example, and create a new package, for example, like this, domain here, and create here, for example, the class which will be, let's say, country. So, and here on our processor, we say country. Okay, this class actually will be a document. Why document? Because the item processor, let's go back here, item processor takes, okay, the one that we are getting from the reader and will return us the one that we are going to use in the writer. Okay, so if you take a look here on the item processor, it receives an input and returns an output. The input is the one that we are getting from a reader. It can be a Kafka reader, a Flatfile reader, an AMQ, okay, reader, okay, and the output will be the one that we are going to send to the writer. And what we are going to send to the writer? We are going to send to the writer class that is compatible to be written into MongoDB, or for example, in other use cases, it could be, for example, a JPA. Now, so we have here, what is it? We have here the Spring Data Mongo, right? This is a document, a Mongo document. And now we need to start, for example, adding some properties. So let's just use the same properties as we have here: country name, country code, country name, continent, and so on. Okay, so in that order, the first thing that we need to add here is the ID, of course, the ID, and we are going to use it as ID. Okay, the Spring Data Annotation ID. Now we need the country name, we need the continent, we need the independence year. IntelliJ is amazing. And we need also, we need the, if I remember, it should be the country code. Country code. Oops, it should be private string, country code, just like that. And as we are using Lombok, which is very nice, of course, we could just use @data. But data is not very nice for the object that we are going to use for our ORM. So what I mean is, data is not very nice when you want to use it for your, let's say, entity class, okay, or your document class. So the best way to do that is to provide, for example, what you need, or argument constructor, for example, no argument constructor at setter, for example, getter also, okay, and I think also we can use toString, okay, toString, okay, anyways, so now that we have here, okay, what we are going to use in order to write, okay, let's go back to our item processor. Here on our item processor, we just need to implement the method. just like that. So remember, our item processor will be a component, okay, because we need to inject it. The next thing that we need to do, for example, here we can just use once again the logger by using cell4j, just like that, and we can log, okay, we can just log here, for example, processing country, okay, and it will give us the country. So the item processor in Spring Batch is very nice to, for example, to filter some data. For example, we could just return the countries that contain, for example, the highest score, or we could filter only countries from Europe or from Asia, Africa, South America, America. So remember, we use in Spring Batch item processor in order to filter, in order to process data. But for this particular use case, this example, we could, for example, just, oh, amazing. Here is the place that we need to map, okay? Because we are receiving a country DTO and we want to return a country domain object. So in that order, let's use the map struct. That's why I'm telling you guys, for example, that we need to have the mapper. Yes, the mapper can be here. For example, we can just add here a new package. Let's call it by mapper, like this. And here we can create our interface. Okay, it should be an interface, and let's say like country mapper, just like that. And let's annotate it with mapper. Yeah, mapper like this. It's not accepting because we don't have map struct. Let's go to our browser, Maven. So just like that, we can go to the let's say official documentation. Let's go here on our POM XML. Just go here on properties. Let's give some space. Let's give some space. Okay, just like that. And now if we go back to our browser, so here on our browser we can get the dependency. Back here in the end, let's add the map struct. We have here the map struct, and here we have the version. Also, we need one more thing, okay? Here is the here in terms of annotation processor path, okay? We need this path here. So if we go here, we have one path, okay? And we need the other path, which is the map struct one. So let's just reload our, yeah, let's just reload it like that. Now let's go back here on our mapper. Now you can see, okay, that we have here the mapper. Let's just use it like that. And yeah, so using MapStract is very easy. Okay, so we just need to add here, and here this is the place that we need to start creating our mapper. So we are going to return a country, okay, and we can just say, okay, map to country domain, just like that. So it will receive a country, okay, and it will map to domain. If I just compile it, okay, so it's just giving here an error, but let me just return it null for now. And now let's compile once again. So no implementation here, but we have also here a typo. Let me just once again compile it. So let's first clear. Let's say Maven clean compile, just like that. Let's take a look here, the implementation. No implementation, but I think this is IntelliJ. And if we take a look here, generated class, yeah, we can see, okay, the map struct actually create the mapper for us. So instead of, for example, creating all these getters and setters, okay, we use map struct. I think I think everybody's using map struct, right? But I don't know why my IntelliJ is not showing here the implementation. Anyways, let's go back here on our item processor. So here is the place that we are going to use, for example, our mapper. Okay, so let's just call the mapper class. So for example, like this, for example, here, let's say country mapper. Okay, that instance, that map to country domain. So it just will receive here, okay, the country, so it will receive the item, okay, which is a country DTO. Let's take a look here. Oh no, it should be DTO. My mistake. So let's compile once again. Yes, and now let's take a look here on the generated code. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so now let's go back here on our processor, okay, and let's just return, okay, what we have done here. So just like this. Okay, so now we have our item processor, because if we go back, so here on our presentation we have the reader, the processor, and now we start creating our MongoDB item writer. I know everybody is waiting for the MongoDB item writer. Okay, I know, but we need to challenge ourselves, right? We need to configure MongoDB Job Repository, and then we will go to MongoDB item writer, which is easy part, let's say like that. So now let's go back to our IntelliJ. So now here on our IntelliJ, let's go back to our country job config, okay, just like that. And let's use first, I think, let's see, our country item processor is a component, okay? So here on our country job configuration, we can use, for example, here the lombok at require ars constructor, which will help help us to inject our components by using the constructor injection. So in that order, let's just use country item processor, just like that. Okay, we inject already. So we have the reader, we have the processor. So and now this is the place that we need to start creating our MongoDB item writer. So in order to create our MongoDB item writer, it will be very simple. We just need to go and create the Mongo like that item writer. So just like that. And here we specify which document, okay, we are going to write. In our case is a country, okay, and here we say, okay, MongoDB item writer, just like that, and MongoDB. So we are going to return a new MongoDB, right, builder, item writer builder. Here we specify, for example, what, the MongoTemplate. It needs the MongoTemplate, okay. So let's use here the MongoTemplate. We don't have MongoTemplate. So now the first thing that we need to do is we need to actually inject the MongoTemplate. Okay, so MongoDB, yeah, MongoTemplate like this. So here we add the MongoTemplate, and then we start adding, for example, our collection. So what is our collection? In our case, collection will be country, like this. And I think, yeah, we can just say build, okay, and that's all that we need. So at Bean, okay, just like that. So now we have our reader and our writer. So this is the place that we need to start. For example, let's go back here. So if we take a look here, we have the reader, processor, right, and the writer, and now we need to start creating, okay, our step and then our job. So let's go back to our IntelliJ. So here on our IntelliJ, let's just put here in the top, okay, we start creating our step. So the name of step will be, let's say, from Kafka to MongoDB, okay, just like that. So here, why it's IntelliJ? What the hell is that? Yeah, so here we can return, for example, the new step builder, okay, the name of the step should be nice. So the name of step will be from Kafka to MongoDB, okay. Our step will be chunk oriented step, okay, which will receive, okay, which will receive a country DTO and will write a country domain object, okay. So it should be a chunk type, and here we can say, for example, our chunk size, let's start with 5, for example, and of course we should put here a very what your business actually, right, requires to you. So here the chunk size, The next thing that it will need is a platform transaction manager. So where is our platform transaction manager? If we go back here to our MongoDB config, we have here, okay, MongoTransactionManager. So when we, for example, here inject our platform transaction manager, it will use, okay, the MongoDB transaction manager. So for now, let's just use here, okay, platform transaction manager like that. So here we just say, okay, here we are going to use the transaction manager, okay? And now this is the place that we need to start, for example, here creating our reader, okay? So country, Kafka item reader, right? And then our processor. So our processor will be this one here. So country item processor. And then we specify our writer. So our writer will be the Mongo, right? Country Mongo item writer, just like that. And here I think we can, for now, let's just use here allow start if complete, okay? Because, for example, we just want to keep, let's say, processing the same job even if it's completed, because we are just showing you guys here an example. And I think, so for example here, I think it needs also one argument. So it needs a name and also, as we can see, the job repository. So in that order, we can just inject also, okay, the job repository. The job repository, okay, this one here, job repository. And here we specify the job repository. And it will also be a bin, just like that. Let's format the code. And now that we have our step, this is the time that we need to create our job itself. So in order to create a job is very simple, right? So we just need to create here a job using the job interface, and the name of our job will be import countries, just like that. And here we can just return the new one, which is the new job builder, just like that. And the new job builder also, as we can see here, for example, it receives a name and job repository. So here the name will be import, just like that, import countries. It also needs a job repository, just like this. And we can, for example, start adding here the incrementer, okay, in order to allow the string batch to increment the job ID, right, our job. And here we can add, for example, the start, okay, which will receive a step, okay, as we can see here, it receives a step. And here we can specify, for example, our step. So the name of our step is from Kafka to Mongo, okay, actually to MongoDB. Let's call it better, okay, from Kafka to MongoDB, just like that. So here we specify our step from Kafka to MongoDB, and then we can just add here build, okay, just like that. So here is our job. Now we have the job, the step, okay, and step contains the reader, which is this first video, it will be reading for Kafka, okay, the next will be reading for MongoDB. So we are reading from Kafka and writing to MongoDB. So let's go back here on our presentation. So now that we have the step and the job, we need to create our job launcher. So for this particular video, the job launcher will be a scheduler, okay? So we are going to schedule our job in order to run, for example, every 20 minutes or something like that. Depending on your use case, you will readjust. So now let's go back to our IntelliJ. So now back here on our IntelliJ, let's create a new package. Let's create our new class. Okay, country, okay, job scheduler. And here it will be also a component, for example, okay. And next, if you remember, let's just use here, for example, the Lombok required our constructor in order to allow us to inject, for example, the job. So job, just like this, job, okay? So our job, the name of our job actually is import countries, okay? But for example, we could go back here and use it like that, import countries. Of course, it will work, but as we have only one job, okay, in our entire application, we can just call it by job like that, okay? So if we had, for example, 2 jobs, we need to specify which job we are running, okay? Just like that. So it should be private final, right? Because we are injecting through constructor, right? So here we need also, for example, private final, the job launcher, okay? We need to inject the job launcher, because if we go back here on our presentation once again, so here on our presentation, this is the job launcher, okay, which is responsible to run our job. So now that we have here that we have injected the job launcher by using Lombok, okay, require ours constructor. This is the constructor injection recommended, okay? Now we need to actually schedule, okay, to create a main that will allow us to trigger our job, okay? So trigger job, well, let's just create here a function, okay, trigger job. IntelliJ, I don't need this. Why are you sending me this? So the trigger job will receive, as we remember, will receive a job parameter. So job parameters will be equal new job parameter builder. So new job parameter builder, and here we can start adding, for example, here the date. Let's call it by processed, process date, just like that, okay? And here the value will be the new date, okay? And it will be the identifier of our job. So that's why we will use here true, okay? The next parameter can be, for example, let's see, we don't need any other parameter, okay? But for example, you can go to our other videos where we are, for example, reading from a file and so on. We can add different parameters, okay? But for this one, for example, the parameter that we are using here, is important that you need to understand that Spring actually, the Spring Batch 5 actually contains different converters for our parameters. But this is something that maybe we can explore a little bit later. But for now, let's just, after having it like that, let's just go to parameter, just like this. And now here, let's use the job launcher. Okay, so let's use the job launcher in order to run our job, okay, by using these parameters. So this will throw an exception, okay, here. I think we can just use here at sneaky throws, okay. This is very nice Lombok feature, okay, for let's say checked exceptions. And here is the place that we need to actually schedule, okay, our job. So when we schedule our job, we can use some different strategy, for example, using fixed delay, fixed rate, and so on. But for this particular one, let's just use here a cron, okay, a cron expression. And as we can see, wow, IntelliJ, the new version of IntelliJ is amazing. Can you see? Okay, we can just put here, for example, to run every 5 minutes, right? Or every minute. But actually, what we are going to do, let me see here. Wow, that's amazing. So what we are going to have here is we are going to run for every 10 seconds, okay? And yeah, just like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. 6, yes. So second, so second, minute, hour, day, month, year, yeah. So now that we have it like that, the next thing that we need to understand is once you use, for example, the scheduled, okay, you need to go to your Spring Boot application and here use the annotation enable scheduling, okay, just like that. Here we have our, let's say, job launcher, okay. Now this is the part that I would like to share with you guys my Docker Compose. So let's just copy from our other video because this is the same Docker Compose that I'm using. If you are following us, you understand that, for example, if you go here, batch, okay, so here in Spring Batch, you will have, for example, some schemas, okay, and we have different schemas for different database, okay. But before moving further, this is the schema, okay, for MongoDB, as you can see, okay, and we will need to copy the schema, okay, and paste it somewhere that will allow us to run that schema. So let me just copy. Let me paste it here. So this is the schema, okay, and here we can just say, for example, use what is the name of our database, country, right? So use country, okay, just like that. So use country, and then it will create us the tables that we need. So let's go back to our presentation. So if we take a look here, when we were talking about the job repository and the schema and the metadata, we knew that we have here some schema, right? So we have some table if we are using, for example, relational database, right? So we have the job instance, the job execution, the step execution, and so on. So that's why I'm showing you guys that schema. This is the schema that we are going to use, okay, for MongoDB. As you can see, job instance, job execution, step execution, and so on, okay. So MongoDB will need it, okay. So now what we can do here, for example, let me just open here a terminal, and I have my Docker running, okay. So Docker is running. You need to have Docker in order to follow our tutorials. So here, having Docker, what I'm going to do, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to run, for example, Docker Compose, right? So the file will be, Docker Compose, app, Mongo, what's the name? Yeah, MongoDB, okay? Okay, so MongoDB is running. So now that MongoDB is running, the next thing that we need to do, let's just try to, let's say, connect, okay, to our instance, okay, just like that. The database is country. So just like this, let's test the connection. Okay, succeed. So now let's go back here. So we have here our country. We can just, for example, go back here and let's use the schema here, okay? So let's just copy the schema and let's paste it here on our console. So what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna use the country database, and now let's create our collections. These collections are the representation of our job repository metadata. So let's run it. But before running, remember, we don't have here anything. And now if we run it, remember, we are using here the country host, okay? So the local host here. Let's run. Okay, it's creating all the sequence and also the collections. Now, if we take a look here, okay, now we have all those tables when we were talking about, for example, here on our presentation. So we have these tables here that will allow our Spring Batch application to use this infrastructure, okay, which is MongoDB and will be related to job repository. So this is what we have here, okay? Remember, guys, I will share with you guys the schema. You just need to run the schema here. Yeah. So the next thing that we need to do is, I think we also need to add here some more configurations. So just like that. So I think the port is not necessary, so we're just gonna use it like this. For example, here it will be localhost, like that, and the default port is 27017, just like that. And here we specify country. You can also play here, for example, Spring Data. Now let's add the Spring Batch. Okay, Spring Batch schema. I think, yeah, we could just add, right, the always, but I don't know if Spring Batch with MongoDB will initialize the schema. And here we can just say, okay, this is the JDBC, right? It won't work like that. So let's just say our Spring Batch to not start the job once the application is up. Okay, so it will be Spring Batch that job that enable. Okay, so it will be false like this. And yeah, so now that we have our, let's say, data source configuration and so on, let's just go back here. So it will be like this. Yeah, country. Okay, nothing else. We don't need anything else. Yeah, let's go back here. The next thing that we need to do is also, for example, we can, as I was showing you guys, that we are not using the JDBC, right? So we can just exclude some, for example, data source. Okay, so let's just exclude the data source auto configuration. The next thing that I have to show you guys is, okay, we are using, for example, Apache Kafka. So you just need to run first the zookeeper, then run the Kafka. The last thing that you need to do is by running the AKHQ. So after running the AKHQ, let's just go back here. For example, if I just go, for example, to AKHQ, you can see that our Kafka, let's say our Kafka UI, okay, is working. Now, this is the place that we need to create our topic. But first, let me see what we have done here on our job. I think the name of our topic is countries. What is the topic here? It will be countries, just like that. So we can just create here, okay, the new topic. Yes. Okay, I think, yeah, we have created here the new topic. The next thing that we need to do is, okay, let's just go here on our job configuration. Let's add also here that enable, okay, batch processing. Because we need to, for example, configure here the data source. Okay, so database type, for example, we could specify here the database type and so on. Okay, so enable batch processing, just like that. So now that we have here it like this, so this is the place that we need to start, for example, our application in order to test, in order to see if it's working as expected. Let's run our application. Okay, transaction manager could not be found. Okay, now I understand the reason. So if we just go here, okay, the name of our transaction manager, okay, it's not transaction manager, so it's Mongo Transaction Manager. So we can replace there or here or there, but so let's go back here. Okay, let's create it as transaction manager like that. So here transaction manager, here also transaction manager. So anyways, let's run once again our application. Okay, now the application is working. Okay, now this is the place that we need to go back to our AKHQ and start producing some messages or events. So in order to produce some messages, we just need to go here on our topic, and then we click here, produce to topic. So here we are going to specify our JSON, but let's just go back here on our IntelliJ in order to see, for example, here, let's go back here. We have these fields here, okay? So I'm just gonna copy these fields here. Let's put it here. So the first field that we are going to use is the country code. So let me just put it here. So for example, the country code will be US. Now the next one will be the country name. So let me just paste it here. Now the next field should be continent. Just like that. The continent is North America. And then we add the independence year. And then we specify, okay, the score. So I think for USA, I'm gonna give it 4 as a score. And now let's just delete all of this. And now the next thing that we need to add here is the key, okay, because Kafka needs a key and the value. So now let's produce the event. Okay, as we can see, we have here the event. So guys, don't worry about this. This is the schema registry that the AKHQ needs to connect. Okay, and now let's take a look here. As we can see, we are not consuming the event. And if we take a look here, okay, so let's just take a look on the logs. Found no committed offset. Okay, so if we just go here on our country configuration, okay, we need to specify the correct partition. Okay, so as we can see, for example, assigned to partition 1. So there is no partition 1, right? We just have one partition, which is 0. Okay, when we create our topic, we specify how many partitions we're gonna have. So we just have one partition and it's 0 base index. Okay, so here we specify 0. Let's stop the application and let's run once again. So the application is stopped, and now let's run once again. Okay, so now it's pointing to the correct partition. It will now process. So if we take a look here on our scheduler, we can see that we are processing every 10 seconds. So let's just see if we get something. So after 10 seconds, I think, oh, okay, we got an exception. Let me stop the application. And I think we can reduce it, okay? Because this is a video and you can play with it later. Okay, all right. Okay, job repository failed, okay. But let's just try to see, okay, cannot use a complex object as key value. It's trying to convert a type. We are going to put here a breakpoint. Guys, this is important to understand, and let's try to see which type, okay, which object actually is giving us this exception. So in that order, let's run once again our application. Yeah, let me just clear. Okay, so now here we have the first one. So let's go in debug mode. Okay, not this one because we are waiting, okay, the one that will throw exception. So this one here is job parameter, okay, batch version, tasklet, step, partition offset. Okay, nothing wrong with that. Okay, I didn't see any exception having it like that. So let me just produce once again a message. So let's now say that the ID is 2, and let's take a look here, okay, on our IntelliJ in order to see in debug mode. Let me just clear the logs. All right, so we got here type, okay, partition offset. Then we have this one, which is countries. Okay, so this is topic partition. Okay, yes, we got the exception. So I think the MongoDB is not able to convert, right? We can, for example, use a converter, but let's just create here a converter that will help us to convert, okay, the topic partition, because the MongoDB, as we can see here, okay, when it tried to convert, so we are going to use a mapping Mongo converter. So if we just go, for example, to the documentation, for example, yes, using Spring Boot, and we can see, okay, that we can use MongoDB in order to convert some types. So this is what we are going to do. So let's just create here our converter. So we are going to call it by topic partition to string converter, okay? Because MongoDB, as we saw there, okay, it will try to convert all this type of key. So in that order, let's create our topic partition to string converter, okay? So just like that. So the converter, as we can see, for example, here on the documentation, for example, we just need to implement the converter, okay, and specify, for example, the type and the one that we are going to convert, okay, just something just like that. So going back here, yes, okay, so we just need to configure it like that. So it will be like this. So we are trying to convert the topic partition, so just like that. And as it's an interface, we just need to implement the methods. So in this case, we are going to use here, for example, let's just use like source, okay, and yeah, just like that. No, source topic, and yeah, something like that, okay. Now we need also to do, for example, the opposite, right? For example, to convert a string to topic partition. I don't think that it's necessary, but let's just use it like that. So string to topic partition, okay. So it will implement also the converter, okay, and we can use also something like this, okay. So here we import, and it should be Apache Kafka common. So this is the topic partition. And here for this case, we just going to, for example, say, okay, so source, yes, just like that. I think it's okay. So if source is equal null, so something like that. Specifying here the partition, no, I think I prefer, for example, to create here, let's say, as I know, okay, let's just use, for example, let's split, okay, because it will contain dash here, because I know the data type. And let's say, for example, here will be, let's say, yeah, this will be the parts, right? Or yeah, let's just call it by parts, just like that. And here we are going to return it like this, okay? So later we can see how we can deal with that. So let's just go back here, and let's create here the Mongo, let's create here a custom conversion, okay, just like that. We can just return the new Mongo conversions, okay. We can just add our conversions, okay, our let's say converters, okay. We add here our converters. So our convert is topic to string, yeah, like that. And the other one should be the new string, okay, to partition, like that. So topic partition to string converter, and string to topic partition. I think we have here a typo. Let's just refactor it. Let's rename, and it should be a converter, just like that. So if we just go back here, okay, we can see that we have it like this. So now that we have it like that, I think here is the place that we need to add, okay. So let's just add here, for example, let's set custom conversions, okay, and let's use here, for example, our custom conversion. So this one here is the one that we are setting here. So I think we can try to run our application once again. Okay, let me just put here some logs. We need to see, for example, yes. So let's run the application once again. Okay, everything seems to be okay. Let me just clean here and let's go back here. I think this one we should put, let's just minimize this one here. Okay, just like this. And here we are going to produce some new messages in order to see what's happening there. Maybe this is the key, right? So let's just put here the message, and here the key will be, for example, 100, just like that. Okay, now let's wait 5 seconds after producing the message. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I don't know, the schedule. Okay, guys. Yes, now as we can see here, okay, so processing country, US, okay, United States of America, okay, and score and so on. So let's just stop the application, and if we take a look here, now the country appear. Now we can see the country here, right? So if we just go here, let's just double click here. Oh, right, it was processing. It was processing, guys. It was processing. I didn't see the logs, okay? That's why I like to, let's add here logs like that in order to be more visible for us, okay? So now we are going to run once again the application. And what we are going to do, guys, as we can see, okay, so we have here some countries, for example, all of them, they are the same. So this is just USA. So what can I do? I'm just going to drop this table, the collection, okay? So I just dropped the collection. So what I'm gonna do is we are going back to our AKHQ. So here on AKHQ, let me make it like that, okay? So here, what we're gonna do here, let me just clear the topic, just like this. And now the way that we are going to produce some, let's say, messages, I'm just going to use my script here. I will produce multi-line messages, okay? So let's just go here, produce to topic. And here, as you can see here, for example, the AKHQ also allow us to produce multiple messages. So that's the reason I'm going to use here, for example, something like this. Okay. Now, what we have here is some countries, as we can see here, for example, Bolivia, Botswana, Canada, and so on. I think, yeah, first, let's just produce it. Let's take a look. Okay, our Spring Batch is processing, as we can see, right? We can see here. I'm going to produce some other countries. Let me just copy here, clean it like this. So here we are going to send some more messages. Okay, just like that. For example, we don't need too much. You can add more messages, but let's use the multi-message. Okay, remember, this is the key. Okay, and then you have here the value. I will actually let's say share with you guys all this configuration. Now we produce, and as we can see, we have here the messages. And now if we just refresh here, if we just refresh it here, you will see here the country. And if we query, you will see all these countries that we are, okay, actually processing. Okay, so let me just, for example, here, yes, we have these countries. Okay, so Austria, Belgium. Okay, so just like that. Okay, everything was okay, processed. Okay, so if we just find, for example, here country name, for example, Denmark. Okay, we can see, okay, the Denmark is here. Okay, now once again, let me just remove it. Okay, so here we just need to remove. Okay, and let's find all. Yes, we can see, okay, we have all the countries. So I think for now this is everything that we need, right? And the application is still running, and now we can, for example, explore a little bit more. For example, here we have our let's say job execution. As we can see, okay, we have the information all using MongoDB and Spring Batch. Okay, so MongoDB is the data source or the database type, okay, that we are using in order to persist our job repository. And in the end, okay, this is the target table. Okay, for example, let me just add one more country, for example, here. Now this time we are just going to copy. Let's just copy here. Let's go back here. Let's copy one more country here, and I will edit that. So we go here, and then we produce here, for example, I don't know the country code of China, but let's just use it like that. So it will be China, is Asia, for example. I don't know, let me Google it. So the independence year of China is, yeah, is this is what I got. Okay, and China is a cool country. And so here, for example, the key can be, for example, 110. And let's just go back here, let's clear, and let's produce, right, the message. Okay, remember, you should produce it like that. And then we can see after 5 seconds the application will actually consume. Okay, so we can see here we have too many countries here. As we can see, we have all the countries that we are processing. So let me just go. Okay, as you can see, guys, go back here, country code China. Okay, can you see China here? And maybe now if I just refresh it, we will see China here. So guys, next part, I think as you can see, guys, we have done. Okay, let's just go back here. Let me stop the application and let me go here. Let me get the script here. Okay, and I will share with you guys here. So here you have let's say all countries that you can play. Okay, so you can just get anything here, or you can just get all of them and produce using the multi-message. Okay, or even let me see if I can also share with you guys here. You can play with this JSON if you want to produce, for example, single messages. Okay, so for example, Vietnam. Okay, you can just grab it here and go and produce a single message instead of course, don't forget, for example, here the key. Okay, and then you can just add here Vietnam and produce the message. So what we have done so far, guys, I'm a little bit sick, so that's why I'm recording this video like that, but I think everything is okay. So we just need to create, okay, the Mongo configuration, and here you have all configuration that you really need. Okay, so this is very simple. And after creating the Mongo configuration, we also specified to Spring which MongoDB database we are using, and then we have created here our country, which actually serve the purpose of, let's say, our domain entity. Okay, so this is a document, right, because we are using MongoDB. But if you are using, for example, JPA or JDBC, okay, or let's say Jakarta, it should be at entity, but we are using MongoDB, that's why it's at document. So, and yeah, then we start creating, for example, we have our scheduler, you already know about that, and also we start creating our job. So we have our job here, then we have a step. Okay, the step is from Kafka to MongoDB. The step contains the reader. As we can see, the reader is just this one here. We are reading from Kafka, and then we have also the writer. So the processor is very simple. We are just logging, okay, and transforming by using mapstruct, which is very nice. Okay, so guys, as you can see, as I was telling you guys that I am doing this video, I try to challenge ourselves because we want to explore a little bit more about Spring Batch, not only Spring Batch, but Spring Boot also. So that's the reason I think I deserve a like. And please like, subscribe, and so just leave a comment, okay? A random comment. Say something about Spring Batch, about MongoDB, or about your country that you didn't see here, your country such India, Nigeria, for example, France or Australia, and so on. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we are going to do the next one. Okay, we are going to use Spring Batch in order to read. Let's just go back here on our presentation. So if you take a look here, so this is what we have done. Okay, and the next video will be reading from MongoDB, process some items, and then write to flat file JSON. Okay, I hope that you really enjoy this video, and please subscribe and leave a like, and let's go to the next video. Bye bye.